Madam President. Well, Labor has effectively caved to the Greens' demands on the safeguard mechanism and said goodbye to both coal and gas in this country. They've given in to placing a hard cap within the mechanism which hamstrings the majority of coal and gas projects into becoming unviable under the mechanism's reduction target. Now, we know those up there will celebrate that, but for those of us that live in the real world, we actually have to deal with the fallout of those things. And what we need to remember, though, about these targets as well is that they'll be just ratcheted down on a whim. These are targets that are going to eventually come for other industries. So businesses, I'd say to you, even if you're not in the sector at the moment that's being impacted here, you shouldn't be fooled that you are immune to these radical agendas. It would be nice if some of the industries did project some metal, find some metal and come out publicly against this policy, and certainly reflect what they're saying in many, many senators' offices on this side of the chamber, and come out and say that publicly rather than being too scared to stand up to this new government. They're at the moment hiding behind the fact that not their chicken, not their chicken coop. But let me be very clear, it will be soon enough. In fact, the Energy Minister spoke with Andrew McCormick on Triple J's Hack a couple of weeks ago about the safeguard mechanism. He said, and I quote, "This isn't just about coal and gas. It's about aluminium, it's about steel making, it's about fertilisers. It's about the two airlines and it's about old and new." So if you think about it for a second, and you think that you won't eventually be caught up in this extreme ideology, you will. The only safe spaces are the solar and wind industries, who this government sits in the back pocket of. And surprise, surprise, those industries have been monopolised by China, as well as all of the relevant resources, cobalt and lithium. Now, we've tried to make this government realise there is a way to have your cake and eat it too in this space, but we do know that it's in Labor's DNA to play big government and make demands of all Australians, their way or the highway. They're not here to serve you. They know what's best for you, and their contempt is palpable. This plan is going to lead to an offshoring of emissions, carbon leakage, plain and simple. This plan is bad for the economy and it's bad for the environment. In order for Australia to decarbonise our economy, we actually should be trying to get the balance right. And that's a balance between cutting emissions and allowing the economy to grow. When people are already paying more for everything, from fuel to groceries through to household and building materials, this plan, this deal, will see those prices continue to skyrocket. As a nation, we actually are already in the midst of an energy crisis and a cost of living crisis. This plan, under the safeguard mechanism reform, will ultimately hurt Australians on both of these issues. It sets Australia up for an even worse energy crisis in the years to come, as some of our key industries buckle under the pressure of mandatory abatement and increased running costs. It doesn't matter if it's the ACCC or the market operator. The Australian government has been told time and time again that the energy crisis we face as a nation is due to a lack of supply. But of course, those that sit opposite this government, they know better. They believe they can still do a deal with the Greens that will actually restrict supply further. This will make it harder for the Australian economy. It certainly won't decarbonise the Australian economy nor the global economy. You want to do what you can to support Australian industry. But unfortunately, this deal with the Greens is about trying to decapitate some of our most important industries just in order to get this ridiculous, nonsensical and, quite frankly, dangerous safeguard mechanism through. And we know that this is the most punitive carbon tax in the world, bar none, but don't be fooled, it's a carbon tax. It's exactly what it is, and it is the most punitive carbon tax in the world, both in the level of emissions reduction and the carbon pricing. And this scheme, surprise, surprise, hasn't been successful anywhere else in the world. And our pricing isn't even competitive with those international prices. And so one might ask, what's going to keep businesses here? Well, it's not. You are in the process, you should be very proud of yourself if this is what you were aiming for, you are going to be sending Australian jobs and industries to China and India, who are in fact, and I mean I know this might require some intellectual fortitude and it's not the strength of some of those that sit at the end of the chamber, I think we've seen that regularly, but these are some of the world's biggest emitters, 4 to 5 times greater than us. So that's great news for the environment in real terms, that the Greens are actually now privy to sending off more emissions, to contributing more emissions to the world through their absolute fantasyland ideology that somehow this safeguard mechanism and the concessions that they've got is going to make one iota of a difference to a country and their emissions that currently supplies 1.3% of emissions globally. But I mean, that would be in the left-wing morality triangle that we know at the top sits solar and wind, economic management, protecting jobs and protecting industry, we know sits somewhere to the bottom. I'm not quite sure if it's second bottom because, you know, abusing conservative women I think is probably their most, one of the things they care most about doing, followed by killing off Australian jobs and small business. But, you know, that's not their issue because the Greens and the activists can cheer and coo for a brief moment when they feel that they've saved the planet before the sun gets blotted out by the increased emissions offshore in Asia. Oh, if only we hadn't let our ideology get in the way of reality. Who could have predicted this? Well, I'll tell you what, everyone that sits on this side of the chamber could have predicted this for you. And there are sensible measures we could take. There's a plethora of technologies and energy sources we should be considering in the medium to long term. But this is what happens when you are motivated by fear or alarmism or ideology. No coal, no gas, no nuclear, no baseload, no clue. When you keep saying the end is nigh, despite the science that you claim to follow, you are forced into rushing into half-baked policies that do more harm than good. And this is the problem when you legislate and force a free market into subservience to the state. When it's enshrined in law, it's very difficult to unwind. And this is a government who wants to make renewables 82% of its energy mix by 2030. They're all cosied up with their renewable friends. Forgetting to achieve that 82%, we need to see a growth of renewables of 1% per month. So perhaps that's why Premier Dan Andrews is over in China, cosying up to his Chinese mates, seeing what support he can get for the government. Chris Bowen also, though, said on Hack a few weeks ago, and I quote again, "As much and as fast as we're transitioning to renewables, the coal-fired power stations will close down and come out of the system. That means you've really only got nuclear and gas. We're anti-nuclear. I don't think nuclear stacks up, and that means you need to make sure that your gas supply is reliable." So hang on, let me just get this straight. 82% of our energy mix will be overwhelmingly renewables, but he acknowledges that we're still going to need a baseload, reliable supply. Coal's gone, nuclear's out under this government. So if he acknowledges that's the case, it's going to be gas that keeps the lights on at night, keeps industry powering ahead. Well, if he actually does believe that, then why is he backing a policy that specifically targets coal and gas companies to significantly reduce their supply and scale back their operations? Why is he crippling the very thing that he says is our only hope? Because this government is at the beck and call of the radical Greens, the renewable industry and its global partners. It is never about Australian businesses or the consumers who are doing it tough for those on the other side. It's all just numbers and targets, not lives and livelihoods. The Coalition has always taken a sensible approach. Our safeguard mechanism, before it was hijacked and corrupted, was designed to halt Australia's emissions at a steady level, so we could then get to work employing measures and policies in consultation with industry, actually speaking to the people that it's going to impact, to begin the task of reducing the nation's emissions while ensuring we could provide consumers with affordable, reliable base load power. And this is achieved through embracing many forms of clean or low-emissions energy sources so that you can provide ample supply and competition to keep prices down and ensure the lights stay on. And despite the obvious flaws in wind and solar that we've spoken about for months and months, it is of course not in the interest of business in that space to bring other forms of energy to the table. They will have a total monopoly in a net zero world. And nobody in this debate is saying that the economy can't or shouldn't decarbonise. It's critical, and it must. But you have to have balance with that whilst allowing the economy to grow. You have to balance that with industry, with jobs, with manufacturing. I mean, the fact that we've just come out of an alleged manufacturing bill and, you know, on one hand they're saying let's boost Australian manufacturing, on the other hand, but hang on, we're going to shut it down because you're not going to have any clinker from the cement. There's been no sovereignty in cement anymore. We won't be able to produce aluminium or steel. We're going to shut down our coal mines so the manufacturers won't have reliable power. I mean, do you even sort of try and map that out in your own head? Do you try and work out that if you're turning the lights off and cutting out all our energy sources, making it more expensive and impossible for manufacturers to do business, that it doesn't matter how much money you put in a manufacturing fund, it ain't going to boost manufacturing. It's not going to boost manufacturing in China. It's going to boost manufacturing in India. It's certainly not going to be doing it in Western Sydney. It's not going to be doing it in the Hunter. All you're doing is sending jobs and businesses overseas. And the fact that you as a government have introduced what you refer to as your signature climate policy, but you haven't had Treasury or the department do any modelling on the impact. Or, maybe you have, but you don't want anyone to know what it is, so you won't reduce it. You won't provide it to the public or anyone on this side of the House. And this actually should concern all Australians. So either they've had the modelling done and it tells them what a disaster this is going to be, and so they're keeping it secret, or they just haven't bothered to do it at all. And we can't get a straight answer one way or the other. And we know that the Greens were actually concerned about this modelling at one stage. They actually were asking questions. But somehow I've got a little bit of a feeling, may have heard through the grapevine of industries as they were coming to see us, they'd also been to see the Greens, they'd been to see others, in desperation to make sure that their businesses wouldn't be so heavily impacted that they had to cut jobs, move their industries offshore. But just something tells me that perhaps the Greens have been showing this modelling, given how they've somehow shifted their support. So I guess same party who stood with us about a month ago asking for detail from the government, but of course these are the political games that they will play. They're not really interested in positive outcomes for the people in this country. They just want to appease their secret supporters and back-alley beneficiaries. If indeed the minister talks about the challenge ahead being akin to the Industrial Revolution, you would think the government would have done extensive economic modelling on the impact of this policy on regional Australia, communities, industry, and just, maybe a little bit of interest how many jobs are going to be impacted. But it hasn't done any of those things, and therefore should not be surprised when the coalition that actually does sincerely believe that you should get the balance right between the economy and the environment, when we start to say, well, actually, hang on, this doesn't stack up. These are policies imported from Europe, designed for European markets and its energy mix. There is no one-size-fits-all approach in this space. What's good for Poland is not necessarily good for Perth. What's good in Sweden does not fit Sydney. So if you look at the Reconstruction Fund again, what we see is an ideological bias from government. It will decide what sectors are in and what sectors are out. And this is the problem with a Labor government. It's all about big government. Big government means they believe they can steer the economy as a government, that industry and enterprise follow government dictates. And, as we're continuing to see, prices will continue to skyrocket under this model like never before. This is a government who came to the Australian people and promised a $275 reduction in household power bills. Now they're going up hundreds of dollars right across Australia. And we found out just over a week ago it's going to go up continually between another 20% and 34%. And that's just the second half of this year. This is a government who breaks promises, cannot deliver on any economic management it's proposed, and I have absolutely no faith that they will be able to get this right. The Labor Party has announced a plan to deindustrialise the Australian economy rather than decarbonise it. Prime Minister Albanese assured us his government would never do deals with the Greens. But how many broken promises can one government stack up? This government is certainly a record breaker in that regard. This is why we warned the Australian people against you. When you go vote Labor, you get the Greens too, the Watermelon Party.
Senator